Now, at Trainual, we have a core value that's no red tape. And so for so long, we had no policies because I thought that was red tape until things started going wrong and we had problems coming up and employees asking us, well, what is the policy for that? I realized as a business, you need some guidelines and it doesn't have to be red tape. So we're going to talk today about where you can rip down the red tape and how you can build policies that empower your teams and actually make a difference for your organization. So let's introduce these two because they're both amazing. First up, we've got Megna Reddy. She's the VP of People Operations over at Loom. Megna's passionate about well-run teams, creating effective processes that help them succeed. Before Loom, she did this in a mix of business and people operations roles, both as a leader and an advisor at companies like NerdWallet. Hey, Megna, thanks for being here.
I'm excited to be here, Chris.
All right. And then next, we've got Michelle Basquette. She's the Chief People Officer at Strava. I think I've put in 15 miles on Strava this week. Michelle loves building teams of amazing people. She believes that by being real, not over-engineering or over-corporatizing HR, you can support great people. And that just looks and feels like the best parts of life. So before Strava, she worked in people roles at some awesome companies like GoPro. We're so lucky to have her. Thanks, Michelle, for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I'm just going to pronounce my name, Michelle Basquette.
Basquette. Thank you so much. Perfect.
Thanks for having me, Chris, and thanks, Megna, for being here.
So, like I said, I use both of your companies literally every day. I've been training for a triathlon, so Strava is like my most opened app. We send Loom videos everywhere. We integrate with Loom at Trainual. It's funny, we announced a bunch of features yesterday, and we kind of offhand talked about our Loom integration. And a bunch of people in the chat were saying the Loom integration is their favorite new feature, which has been around for a little bit, but we appreciate you over here. So if you could maybe fill in the gaps a little and give us just a little bit of background about, what your company does and what you're responsible there.
I can go. So Loom is video messaging for work, which is instead of having to write a long email or explain in a document or set up a meeting, the easiest way to express yourself often is to just send a little video message. And that's what Loom does. So it makes it easy to do that. And I head up the people and operations teams at Loom. So talent, people operations, workplace IT. So a lot of the roads to policies lead to me. So I think about policy all the time. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Perfect.
Yep.
Michelle?
Great. Yep. So I'm Chief People Officer at Strava. In case you're not familiar, Strava is the center of connected fitness. We have a global community of over 90 million athletes on Strava. And in case that's intimidating and you're wondering if you're an athlete, we think an athlete is anyone who sweats. I never saw myself as an athlete. I'm just going to put it out there. But I, too, am part of the Strava community and find just inspiration and joy in the community of people who believe in moving and being active.
It really is a great community. And even coworkers that I have that will go on a walk at lunchtime, you'll see a little 10-minute walk or something. And it's nice to just be able to log that and celebrate each other. So some policies are created over time as a business grows, but some you kind of want in place from the beginning. And so I'd like to start with each of you talking about the smallest businesses that are on this call. Say there's people with a 1 or 2 person company. What are the first foundational types of policies that you'd recommend someone start to think about?
I think to me, policies is a bit of a tough word. So I'm going to say, I think the first thing you need to make sure you have at your 1 or 2 person company is values. At Strava, our values are well articulated and they're alive and well in the company. Our values are anti-racism and authenticity, balance, commitment, camaraderie, craftsmanship. But those values I name because everything spins from that. When we have a tough decision to make or when the world's giving us an unpredictable situation and we need to make a decision or a policy, we first lean on our values and we can express the culture that we want through our policies because we know what we believe in.
Such a great point. Megna, what would you add on that?
I think it's, when you say policy, it feels like it's something bigger than it is. I've been in a lot of early stage startups and I start to think, as a reasonable person, what is unclear to me? So it could be anything like, I'm not sure if I can take time off during the day to go to a doctor's appointment, or I'm not sure how I do X or how I do Y. Can I do this? And then I think anything that has ambiguity, that's where a policy or just expectations are really helpful for folks to say, yeah, actually, it's okay to take some time off. Or if you're going to do it in this way. And so I think, I would just put myself in your employee's shoes and say, what are the questions that you're getting every day? What are the things that are not clear to someone who's on your team? And that's where I'd start.
Yeah, it's true. Policy can be just kind of a daunting word. It feels like a bureaucratic kind of thing, but really it's just setting the right expectations. And it could be simple things like, is it okay to wear pajamas when I log in on Zoom, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that you brought up values too. We talked about values a lot in the last session I moderated about managing people, and it just came up over and over again. But it's a filter for a lot of decision making when there isn't a crystal clear expectation set. So how should people go about creating those filters, or is there something that you all do to communicate your policies out? Call your values out?
I think there are, when we say values, I would expand it a bit and say, how do you run your business, right? What is your culture? And I think that relates to what you're talking about, Michelle, as values as well, which is, do you want to be the type of business where you want to offer flexibility, right? And say, you know what, you're home, wear your pajamas, I don't care. Or are you the type of business that feels like, no, actually, the kind of culture we want to build is one of formality because of who we are. And I don't think there's a right or wrong choice. I think it's actually deciding what the choice is for you and then letting people know why and how and just communicating it out. So I do think there is an overarching, what are our guiding principles for how we work? And you can call them values, culture. And I think people call all of those things, but that's something to decide and to just tell people and let that be clear.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I would say the other kind of entry point for policy is fairness. So, the argument for policy is that we can put a consistent kind of floor in to make sure that each of our teammates is experiencing the same opportunities, privileges, benefits, et cetera. But we try to, when we need to, we try to do that in the kind of purest way we need to, as light as we can. So, I'm happy to go into some details because there's just been such an opportunity for decision point around policy over the last year and a half. It's, talk about what you said, Megna, about like, what are the questions people have? Many. So
yeah, let's dig in. So what are the big questions that are coming up right now?
I mean, of course, the very first thing that happened in the pandemic for Strava was we did smartly a global test work from home day back in March 2020, when we thought we might need to go to remote. And spoiler alert is we're still in the test. We never returned from the test. But so I think the first question of just, can we work remotely and can we make that work? But shortly within the first couple of weeks, as it became clear that this was going to persist, questions were, can I go somewhere else? Like I'm just dialing in remote. First question is it okay if I work from my mom's house in Oregon? And then it became, is it okay if I move? And so on. And so as we've gotten into just each of these situations that's presented, I think the theme of COVID and the policies created in COVID was, what do people need? And the best policies are the ones that allow people the choice to support and care for themselves in the best way for them. And the variety of what does caring for myself mean is so wide. So any policy that's trying to sort of direct people toward one set of principles around, you got to do it this way or that way, in my opinion, is going to be unsuccessful, because what do people need is a huge question. And the best policies just start with the best flexibility and the best choice for the individual person.
So I'm curious for you, when you started getting those questions like, can I work from my mom's place? Did you just call executive meetings to discuss those things? Did your values make it an instant decision? Or what was the process of turning that feedback into what became a policy?
There's first the hiding under the bed, looking around like, where's the answer? This conference's playbook. I think the playbook for the people leader has been severely questioned. The last year and a half, the playbook didn't have the pages that I needed. So we were actively writing, but like I told Michael, my boss, our co-founder, I'm like, I get excited when somebody asks me like a really straightforward, like HR question right now. I'm like, yes, what is it? Give it to me. Because most of the questions are really complicated, highly moral. Is there a right answer or not? There's only what's right for you and the culture you're trying to create. So I guess the policy, we had a COVID task force. There were just 4 people on it, including our GCA co-founders and myself. So there was that like just small group of people who are relying on values and trying to do the right thing and show up with a policy. I feel really proud of how we've led Strava through the pandemic because we haven't relied on like, what is everyone else doing? What's the benchmark? Is there any precedent for this? We've just leaned into like our gut, the right thing, and what do people need? If you kind of get that trifecta going of good, smart people, solid values, rigorous decision making, and what do people need? And then feedback, right? We've done a lot of things where we're like, whoo, that kind of didn't land, or that, and how can we learn from that? And how can we improve it the next time we're trying to come at that?
I love just leaning on your gut. Like, what feels right? How do we do this? We do something similar. We have a 5-person Slack group type thing that we use, and that's where we make all these tough conversations. Megna, how about you? What are the burning questions that have been coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of the same experiences, Michelle. I call it the Hunger Games of policymaking. It's like things change so much. I do think that, my answer was different last March and last June and last July. And at this point, almost 2 years in, this is normal now. And I think we came to that realization, at least I felt that way sometime last summer. We're like, actually, this isn't going away. And so how do we lean in versus try to kind of, pull back, right? And so people wanted to move, same things, people wanted to move. And we're like, yeah, let's figure out how to do this. And I don't want to underestimate just the complexity and the burden on the HR teams, right? Because it's hard. It's like someone wants to move, you're not, you don't have payroll in that state. How are you going to do that? How are you going to deal with compensation? And I think it's been incredibly challenging for a lot of, on the HR side or the admin side or the policymakers. It's been like, okay, we want to do this. Now, how do we do this? But I fundamentally believe that when the wind is blowing some way, you don't want your policy to be the one that's like holding it back. I think you just have to figure out, how am I going to make this work in a way that makes sense for us? Like that makes it fair, right? That fits in with our values, that fits in with our business, because there are practical considerations around cost, around equity, around all of those things. And so I've basically told myself and my team, you know what, we're going to put our energy to figuring out how to make this work, because you have to, this is the new normal. And I think that's been pretty hard and in some ways also rewarding, right? Because I think it's easier than trying to kind of pull it back.
Yeah. All right. Well, continuing with the Hunger Games, I love that the analogy there. When you get these questions, these tough questions, do you make a policy right away? Do you wait until the question's been asked 3 times? How do you decide between one-off scenarios or accommodations versus something that you want to roll out company-wide?
I would just say we definitely search for themes. Our team, when you get these, I thought you were going to say, what do you do with them? And I was going to say, I give them to someone on my team, because they'll laugh. We have like all these hashtags, give it to Ari, give it to Julio, give it to, like, just to be like, it's almost overwhelm. That if you're putting the question forth, how can we help support you? You're going to get a lot of different answers about that. So we do look at themes. We do quarterly engagement surveys, get open and anonymous feedback for people. We look for like, what are the big swelling themes and clearly something we need to address. But also if we get a question that just sparks a great idea of like, yes, we should be doing that, then we go after that. And then of course we have our own ideas. But I would say, policy again, it's a kind of a strange word. It's more like approach. What is our approach to this? What is our, answer? And then it can vary anyway from like, here's a couple of guidelines. Or sometimes it's just a Slack message. Many of you have asked if it's okay to do X, and we want to say, yes, it is okay to do X. Is that a policy? We link it on a guru card, but it's not, a formal policy, which requires a little bit of structure. So there's lots of different ways, I think, to answer those questions. And it really depends on the magnitude of like how big of an issue and how persistent will this be. Yeah,
I think I agree with a lot of what Michelle said. I think it's, the thing that I sort of remind myself and my team is also we're employees too, right? I think so. We do have empathy. It's like, do I want to move? What are things that come to me? It's like, I know recently for us, a lot of questions have been around, for us, for our business, it's quite easy to work from home. We can get things done virtually. So we've done that and like, maybe a retail or a different kind of storefront businesses. But then people do want to meet up in person. And that's something that I think about too. It's like, yeah, it would be nice to meet up. And that's usually the impetus for saying, if I'm feeling this way, chances are someone else is feeling that way, even if they haven't slacked you. So I think just like keeping in touch with our own empathy as like employees, like what would I want, right? What are the kinds of things that I want to ask, but maybe I wouldn't ask in a public forum, and just being able to surface those is important.
I will say a couple of other shifts that have really helped, in addition to the most flexible policies and approaches seeming to be the best ones now in this new kind of new work normal. A couple others are blended solutions, like versus binary. It's either this or this. It's okay. I understand that for many of you, you would like this. For example, many people are like, I never need to go to the office again. And then you've got people on the other side who are like, I miss the office. I feel lonely. I miss connection. And then everything in between. And so while we find ourselves many times, or I find myself, frankly, saying like, it's easier to just leave them closed. There's so much safety, regulatory environment is changing. So let's just go with they're closed. And we've really had to push ourselves to go, how can we get some people there? Like, what would it look like to be flexible or to create something? So our offices are not fully open right now, but you can sign up, you can go through a process, you can use them a few days a week. So I think stretching our team to think about everything in the middle has been a really good approach. Trying to think about, second principle, like what's the most we can do? What's the most the business can bear instead of like, what's the least fix for people. So pushing ourselves really toward, I'll give you an example. Last summer, with schools being closed for almost all of our parents, they were experiencing the dark days of blended life. Every day is bring your kid to work day. And so we were thinking about like, how can we really meet people's needs? And again, we have very generous leadership and kind of people first. But what we ended up doing was giving all of our caregivers a stipend. And it's generous. It's $500 a week for people to offset the cost of childcare. And that program is still in place, but it's an example of like, what's the most we can do right now for people? And instead of kind of what's the bare minimum to clear this next hurdle.
I love that. And you're probably going to get a bunch of applicants who are not happy at their jobs and are like $500 a week. So
sorry, our director of talent is on. I saw her in the chat, Camille. So right. Hashtag give it to Camille. Yeah.
Perfect.
We welcome that.
Megna, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was going to echo what Michelle was saying around just forcing, and this is something that I've found I had to do with myself, is being okay with more gray and not clean solutions, right? Because I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think there are parents who are like, I will never do this commute again, like never again. And there are folks that are single and young and are like, I need some social life. And so we're trying to find these in-betweens that I think are very different from the kinds of policies that were normal, a year or two ago, right? It was like everyone's in the office, everyone's not. And we're creating small offices for folks to come in who want to come in, and we're not going to force anyone else to come in, but it's an option, right? I think it's become this sort of grayer space where we're saying, you have the option to stay home, you have the option to come into the office, you have the option to do this, you have the option to meet up. And it's a different way of thinking than I think even for me has been quite a stretch, but the more we force ourselves, I think, to offer flexibility, the more we end up doing smaller little things for lots of folks, right? So that's definitely a change for me.
Yeah, when you think about the optionality and flexibility that we're talking about, it's almost the opposite of what most people think a policy is, with, you know, constraints. But you're by having something written down that explains the flexibility, you're answering the questions, which is kind of the new definition of a policy. And Michelle, I know you mentioned that early on, that policies are kind of empowering in some ways to give opportunity. So I'm curious if you could each speak to that a little bit more, how policies aren't necessarily to oppress everyone and, you know, keep you operating by the rules, but how what policies have you put in place to create fairness or an even playing ground?
I was trying to think of how I would answer this. Well, one, I agree with you. I think good policy is great because it's expectations and it makes clear what the expectations are for everyone, right? And that's fundamentally fairness. If everyone has the same expectation, you know what you should do or you shouldn't do. And so I think good policy is that. I think where it starts to become red tape is when, I'll put it this way, I think, and any HR person will probably agree with me, which is 98% of the people are reasonable. And there's like 2% that are completely unreasonable. And when you try to kind of, and everyone knows who they are because like you come across them. And when you try to make policy for the 2%, I think it makes it really horrible for the other 98%, right? And this is true even for COVID. There is someone for whom the COVID restrictions, like there's no amount of safety that will make them feel good, right? And you can sort of then shut the office and be like, we'll never go in because that's the only way we can guarantee safety. Or there's some in between in the gray. And I think I think good policy clears expectations and lets you kind of, gives you some enough for the 98% to make good choices. And I think where it starts to feel really oppressive is when you get to that 2%, right? When you're trying to be like, everyone must follow this rule, you'll always get someone. There will always be someone.
Like a bell curve, you know, that just only go so far down the bell curve.
Yeah, and then that's compliance, right? When you're getting in the edges of the bell curve, it's compliance. But it's really, I mean, when you're making it for the 98%, I think you can be quite reasonable and flexible and live in the gray and be okay with it, which is like, if you are someone who wants to work in an office with everyone else expected to be in the office, chances are Loom's not the place for you. Like, because you're in that 2%, you know, almost everyone, the 98% wants flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say there's like two things that come to mind where the policy was about like raising the tide for, and lots of examples of this, but one of them is we rolled out a summer time off policy. We have discretionary time off at Strava for our exempt employees. And so that is essentially unlimited or unaccounted for time off. But we found, just like most companies, that people just weren't taking time off. They're at home, they can open their laptop, they can work, they're burnt out, et cetera, et cetera. So we tried rolling out this big summer time off policy where what we wanted to do was like really push time off, and not like a day or two, but like a lot of time off. And so we started to talk about it, and where the policy came in is there were certain people that you say, guess what, we want you to take a lot of time off. And they're like, oh, I'm going to request a week off. And then there are people who hear that and they're like, I'm requesting 6 weeks off. And so, you know, there's different levels of privilege and entry points where people feel emboldened to ask for what they need. So it's not enough in that case just to communicate, take what time you need. We actually had the policy say, and it could mean take 3 2-week vacations between now and the end of the year, take 3 to 4 weeks off, take every Friday. Like, so by naming certain things, we're creating that fairness of, I can see myself in this policy and I can ask for what I need, even if I would feel like, whoa, that is way out of bounds prior to this. So that's an example of something where I feel like by naming what we meant, it was a more fair experience.
That's a great example. We've heard the same thing. We say, take the time you need, and then nobody takes any time. So I love that example. You both have really cool brands. So I'm just curious, what do you think is the most unique benefit that you offer at each of your respective companies?
The reason I joined Loom, and I think it's what's amazing when you do join Loom, is you realize how work can be different, because we use Loom a lot. We use a lot of asynchronous, which is we're not always on Zoom, because we fundamentally believe that like no one can be on 8 hours of Zoom, but you want the flexibility. So how do you actually create a world where you get flexibility, but then you're not tied to this screen? And I think that's the fun part about being at Loom, is we're figuring it out too. And we're using our own product, you know, working through. So it does feel like, obviously I drink the Kool-Aid, but it really does feel like we're at the forefront of how work will be done in the future. I think a lot of people are catching on to say, like, how do we make this work? And we are pushing the boundaries. And that's super exciting for me. And I think that's a fun part, is we really get to use our product and live our product every day.
I think on that note, yeah, two things. One is kind of an approach or part of the values, and the other is an actual benefit. The cool things about Strava, on our value of balance, like, it is true and through at Strava. We have a motto: there's always time for family and there's always time for a workout. And so it is like one of the coolest parts of the culture is just like, it's 11 o'clock, like, okay, signing off to this meeting. I'm going to go on a trail run. I'm going to come back. I just showered, and I'm back in the meeting. And it's the first place I've ever been where there's just no side eye for like taking care of yourself, being active, leaving work, and and knowing that you're trusted to get it done. And then I think just a really bespoke Strava benefit, true to form, is that we have a gear and events stipend every year, so people can spend $1,000 on anything they want related to their active lifestyle. It's just pure joy. What do people do with it? Whether it's lift tickets, race entry fees, a Peloton, whatever their thing is, and it's just joyful to see people express themselves through that stipend.
I love that. We did something similar. We call it an experience fund, experience stipend, and we give everybody $500 a year, but then they post in our channels and put pictures of all the cool things they did. And it's a cool way to see what people are interested in outside of work. So I love that. So on the flip side, have there been times where you've rolled out a policy that just didn't land well and you had to retract it? It shouldn't have been a policy.
Oh, all the time. I mean, I think that if it were easy to get the balance right, I think people would do it more often. And part of it is approaching it as learning, right? I mean, a recent one for me that we just rolled back was, we wanted to let people meet up in offsites. And then we tried to give them we were like, okay, be outdoors, make sure everyone from the team can come, make sure you go to a place with high vaccination. And we gave them this whole list, and like no one did it because it literally was impossible. And my friend said, okay, fine, here's $500. Just make sure you meet with one other roommate. Like, doesn't matter. No rules, just go. And it was great because I think in the world that we live in today, it's like no one knows 4 weeks from now whether you're going to feel safe going somewhere. But they're like, you know what? I can see you for dinner today. I'm going to meet you for dinner. And it actually worked fantastic. And we're just like, yeah, let's create some social life, right? That's because we're all behind a screen. We're not meeting up, but there are opportunities to just go have dinner and do something. So how do we do that? So, I think I don't shy away from rolling back because I think otherwise you get to, sometimes you just don't know and you're going to figure it out. And the trick is to learn quickly.
Yeah. And I would say, I can't think of a specific one that was really dramatic of like, of course, there's things where we're like, we're opening the offices. No, we're not. We're doing an all company get together. No, we're not. Because we're responding to the Delta variant and just the world that's going on. But I'll reference the summertime off policy again of a great example of like, that has been a mixed bag completely. So many employees were like, I loved that. That was awesome. And a lot of our business partners were like, that was really hard on the business. And so I think just taking that feedback, depends who you ask. Was that a great program? Was that a disaster? We're still sorting through it. But the spirit of like, we're bold and we're willing to do a big thing to try to solve a problem and then take the feedback and hear it and figure out how do we make this a little bit better versus this barrier to like, I better not, if there's any chance this is not going to land or create a hardship for anyone, we better not do it. Like we think we'd do well to just go out for, go for it, play to win. And then take the feedback, iterate. There will be another version of that policy shipping.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, just growth mindset, right?
Totally. We've rolled out beta policies before where we just acknowledge that it's a test, it's a beta. Like, we're going to try for this quarter to do this and we'll see how it goes. And I think that's it's a way we've hedged our bet on some of these things.
That's the best hack of all. Just put draft, pilot, trying.
But it's hard. I think a lot of businesses and a lot of people listening could be tempted to make reactive policies and then not roll them back. And if you're not willing to roll them back and kind of say, oops, that was a bad idea, it makes it really hard on the business. I know even the other day, my son was like pouring apple cider and spilled it. And I'm like, no more cups on the counter. My wife's like, settle down. And I think businesses, they have the same kind of instinct to put things in place when things go wrong. Okay, so I know we've only got like 9 minutes left, but remote has been just a new a new game for a lot of people. And some of you, have probably been remote for the beginning or were used to this pre-pandemic. But I'm curious, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but are there specific expectations that you have needed to set for people working or logging in from everywhere they are? Are there things that everyone watching should be thinking about for their business?
I was going to say, I don't know that there are specific policies, because I think everyone's business is different. But as a guiding principle, I will say, I think it's going to be very hard to take back flexibility. So the more that we can lean in and really get the most out of the flexibility, I think is the best. Is like really give people the flexibility to go pick up their kids in the afternoon, take a run, but then figure out how are you going to make the rest of it work, right, with the business. And so we've leaned in enormously to flexibility and said, within very large limits, like go work anywhere you want, go travel while you work. One of the things that we've done, which sounded controversial at the time, but is not anymore, I think, is we don't change compensation across the country. So move wherever you want. And we just equalize compensation. And that's, I think, just one, it's just released so much emotional burden from like the choice of like, where do I live? Yeah. And frankly, for us too, it's sort of like, if it's truly remote, we don't have to worry, like, let's not even think about it, right? We would have hired you in this area, but we'll hire you somewhere else. So a couple of examples that we've done that have been helpful.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think just on the theme of like making it work, just trying out some norms, like you can work from anywhere, but within reason, you need to center some of your working hours over a specific time zone. And so just saying like most, our employees dial in for our weekly all hands, for example, and just like trying to set some norms. But in addition to the time zone, it's like, and work with your manager and like make sure things are covered, and just policies that acknowledge everyone being an adult and being, it does, these kind of flexible like workplaces and solutions require strong managers, good, ability to like support performance and development and all those things we're leaning into, because it just, we have to be able to support people in the right ways, like to have a conversation when they need to have one and all that. And it's easier to put all these policies in place, right? But we prefer the like human centered, let's just have a conversation about it if we need to. But like you were saying, designed for the 98%.
I love that. Well, so I guess as we're starting to wrap up here, the last major issue that I keep hearing from everyone is this wave of turnover that everyone's either experiencing or expecting. So I'd love if the two of you could just rattle off, so what are you doing in your companies? It seems like if everyone's already listened to everything else you've said and they've built those values and they've taken care of people and have incredible benefits and all that, hopefully turnover is not as much of an issue. But if you were speaking to someone with this concern, what's the hit list of things that you would advise them to do?
The hit list. Oh, by the way, yeah. But the word of or expression of the month is, the Great Recession, the Great Resignation. Yes, not recession. We hope that's not the word. But my response to that is like, first of all, hopefully it doesn't take this for you to think about how people are doing. The number one thing is like I think the era of like you work for the corporation is just over. Like the trend toward flexibility, the like, hey, you're doing me a favor by being in this seat. It's just everything's kind of on its head. It's like we understand that we're lucky to have this group of people here choosing to work at Strava. And we need to do well to understand in the day-to-day how they're doing, what's coming up for them, think about their emotional health and well-being. Any one program that we like try to instill, I've been in companies where it was like retention bonuses and like all this stuff. You got to know how people are doing. And they're not all doing great, but like to be open about that, to create the feedback channels, to support people, to help develop them the way they need, and just think holistically, how's our culture? And is this a place worth staying at? If not, what should we do about that versus it needing to be to like save employees?
So true. Megna?
The things that matter are the same things that mattered 2 years ago, I would say, before COVID hit, which is, do you feel valued by your manager? Do you feel like you have growth opportunities in your company? And I think the last one would be, can you work in the way, do you have autonomy to work in the way that you want? And I think a lot of the conversation is centered around the third, which is like, can I work from home? Do I work from the office? Can I travel? But the first two are still really important. And I think those are, if I look at it, those are the things that we really have to focus on. And I think that ultimately makes a difference whether someone stays with you or not. And none of that's changed. I think what's hard is now we're doing it through Zoom, right? I think an in-person conversation can go a long way in a lot of ways. And so we think a lot about that, which is like, how do we make sure that people are having a great relationship with their manager, right? This is again coming back to like, go out for a coffee. Sometimes we're just like, go get a coffee, like build that relationship because it's hard. How do we feel like you still have growth opportunities and there's visibility for work that you're doing? So in some ways, I think most of what we're doing hasn't necessarily changed regardless of the Great Resignation. I will say is like, I think when you have a shock to the system in the way COVID has, people do reevaluate their life, right? And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Like if you're looking at your job and saying, this isn't what I wanted to do in life, I think that's okay. I think it's not okay if you're leaving because, your manager didn't value you or you felt like, okay, Loom is not a great place for me. So we do a lot in terms of surveys, manager training, working with people one-on-one to make sure those things are in there. And if ultimately you're like, wow, life is short and, I've done this startup thing and now I want to go on the beach, I'm like, go forth and conquer. I think it's okay. I think this is where my philosophy is, let's embrace it, right? The Great Resignation's coming. Let's make sure we're doing all the right things that, we still have the right ingredients, which makes Loom a great place to work, but let's embrace it. Like, okay, we're just going to have a few more people coming in and out and it's okay.
Well, like you said, I mean, it's kind of back to the basics. The same things that were true a couple years ago are still true today. So for everyone that's listening, go back, listen to this interview again and again. So many good tips in here. And honestly, sending someone a Loom about how much you appreciate them or taking a group of your teammates on a run and logging it in Strava are two great ideas for just building that kind of culture. And I could say I've done both this week. So I'm so thrilled to have you two here. I think you had some great advice about how to make people feel valued and how to recognize that they are a special group that we are lucky to have as employers. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate everything you shared.